to write Punjabi poems in his early life. During this isolation period, I don't think he wrote any poetry. I don't remember him ever writing it. But that was possibly due to the threat of being investigated or searched any time by the authorities while he was in detention. But he did enjoy reciting classical Punjabi poetry to us as children, and I still remember words of some of them because he was a voracious reader and used to receive selective books and newspapers from Nairobi City Central Library. I picked up this habit of reading from him as well, I guess, and so did my brothers. During his detention, he could only communicate via brief letters, as all his mail was censored. All ingoing and outgoing mail was censored. But he cherished getting our school reports and felt very proud to see his children were doing well despite his absence. I do not know, but maybe consciously I worked hard to just please him. That is a possibility. My nephew Arvinder, who is here in the audience here, he remembers him as a quiet, softly spoken man who never lost his temper. I too don't remember him ever scolding me or my brother. Arvinder recalls that when he and his younger brother Manmeet were left in his care, he had difficulty controlling the two unruly boys. These two used to be unruly boys when they were young, but never once raised his hand or scolded them. Arvinder does recall him to be affectionate. Arvinder does not recall him to be either affectionate or emotional. By this time, Papaji had been shunned away from the political arena and possibly as a result had further withdrawn into himself. It is so sad that this was the time when he could have really enjoyed some normal life, especially his grandchildren. He had 2 of them at the time. Papaji was a very forward-looking husband and father. My mother often used to tell me that when they got married, it used to be a tradition in those days that the daughter-in-law had to cover her face with the chunni, that's a scarf, in the presence of a father-in-law or other elders. But my father put a stop to that right away from day one. He wouldn't allow such a thing. He believed greatly in equality of a man and a woman as well, as a husband and wife. He was all in favor of me to do further studies. In those days, not many girls used to allow to study. And he was quite happy to send me off to Canada. Once I finished my MSc, he wanted me to carry on with PhD. But I wasn't ready at the time. But I have to tell you something here, that when I did finally wrote my PhD thesis, he wasn't living. And at the time, I had 2 young kids. That was after I got married, and a lot of support from my husband, Sadul, who is here as well here today. I used to draw inspiration from his thoughts, and often used to say, Papaji, you are not here now, but I'll certainly complete this thesis for you, somehow or the other. When I left for Canada, his going away advice to me was that with perseverance and determination, one can accomplish anything. This advice has seen me through all the upheavals in my life right up to this day. My grandmother simply adored her only son, for he could do no wrong ever for her. Papaji was greatly saddened and greatly disappointed when he was not allowed to attend his mother's funeral, despite assurances that nothing untoward would happen. He wasn't allowed to see her face for the last time. The colonial government of the day tried this ploy possibly as an emotional blackmail, but they failed quite miserably. Such an act would be totally against human rights these days. As my nephew Arvinder pointed out one day to me, that it is a measure of Papaji as a person that he never once used this matter against the authorities, even long after the event. He was a genius in his time, courageous and fearless, way of doing and saying things and yet observing the rule of law. He could stand up to the entire British Raj and fight injustice using peaceful means, as you've already heard about his hunger strikes and processions. He did not believe in violence or ever promoted it. My brother Hindpal distinctly remembers an incident when he was only 3 years old. As mentioned earlier, that he was just after the Second World War, he was sent to India. He went to India with his family, and within 6 months of his arrival there, he was imprisoned and was moved from various camps in India. During that period, he was transferred from Lahore to another camp called the Ulali camp, and his train was supposed to stop at the Delhi station for a few minutes. And my brother was taken by my mother and her father to meet Papaji at the station, just to see him go past for a few minutes. On seeing him behind the bars, my brother naturally started to cry profusely. What's going on here? It was very upset. And the police who was escorting Papaji said, "Kaka," that means young boy, "your father is never afraid of anyone. Why are you afraid of us and crying?" Another incident. During his trial in 1950, he daringly said to the Attorney General, "His Majesty's government has no right to rule this country." He stood up and said that. And then he said another thing. He said, "I'm a communist. There are trade unions in England which have communist officials, but the government never victimizes any union because its official is a communist. And that is why I still say I'm a communist. Let the government try me for being a communist if it is illegal." After independence, the new Kenyan government distanced themselves from him because he declared himself to be a communist. That was possibly, we reckon, the main reason, because it was a dreaded word in the 60s and the 70s. But sadly, none of them understood his brand of true communism. His communism was a pristine communism. During his restriction in remote places of Kenya, as we've just mentioned, Lokitong and Maralal. In Lokitong, there used to be highly poisonous snakes, scorpions. Around Maralal, there used to be wild animals, elephants, wild buffaloes, lions. I don't remember him ever showing any fear. He carried one stick. That was his only weapon when we went out for a walk. In Lokitong, he became an expert at killing the snakes. There were times when elephants would be crossing his path during his walk, or they would go right past the residence that Shiraz showed you, those three. They were just aluminum, metal. They were not even insulated or anything. You could hear. And when the elephants used to go right past them, rubbing against them. There used to be lions, and the toilet was an outhouse, and that didn't have a door. And the lions used to be right outside sometimes, but nothing ever made him afraid of any of those things. I would say he was a brave man both in spirit and his deeds. Papaji was a great nationalist and an exemplary patriot. He was amongst the first ones to use the slogan Uhuru Sasa, which has already been mentioned, and that means freedom now, in his famous speech on May Day 1950, which Shiraz has already mentioned. And that set the ball rolling for Kenya's eventual independence. This happened just a few days before his arrest and long detention. In the history of Kenya, there were several prominent Asians who joined hands with African majority, largely to protect the electoral and business interests of the Asian community in the face of determined European stranglehold there. However, Papaji's role was unique in that he selflessly, with total devotion, and without expecting any rewards whatsoever, fought for the basic rights of the unprivileged working class, very largely African, to improve their living conditions. After Kenya's independence in December 1963, Papaji was not given any position or recognition in the new government. One of his associates, called Fitz D'Souza, once asked him, said he would speak to Jomo Kenyatta, who, as you all know, was the president of Kenya, that he would speak to Jomo Kenyatta on my father's behalf, on his own behalf, to offer my dad a suitable post in the government. And my father's reply to that was, Fitz, I'm willing to do anything worthwhile, but I don't want to ask anyone on my behalf for a job. Never in my life have I asked for anything, begged for anything. I'll never accept any job that has been asked for, any offer that is not a spontaneous recognition of my usefulness. In other words, he was no one's stooge. The short period that I spent in Nairobi after his release, not once did I hear him complain or even mention anything about not being given the recognition by the current ruling government. Not once. Whenever anybody raised this issue, his answer was, I did the work not for receiving any rewards. Again, a totally selfless person. However, I must say that he did become very quiet and withdrawn, and I'm not sure whether he ever revealed his feelings to anyone at all or not. All I remember is that in his later years, he worked feverishly at his typewriter trying to complete the books that he wrote. He loved Kenya and its workers, irrelevant of race, color, or creed. In our family, he was the first one to obtain Kenya passport after the independence. I think as soon as the passports were being given, he was there to get it. It used to amuse us when he would stand up as the Kenyan national anthem played on television or radio. It is impossible to think anyone today in any country would actually do that. It's unbelievable. Papaji died peacefully in Nairobi on 18th May 1973 at the age of 59 after a short illness, when I was still in Canada. His passing away devastated me, as that was when it dawned upon me that my communication with my father will always stay unfinished. His loving memories still motivate me and will do so until my last breath. It's well known that a political man's family life is usually in disarray. It has numerous impacts on the family members: emotional, psychological, physical, education, financial, health, and it goes on and on and on. We too had a tough childhood, but with family support and guidance, we all are today successful in our respective professions and family lives. We all remain extremely, extremely, extremely proud of him. He did not leave any material wealth, but what he has left behind is a priceless legacy and history that inspires and guides us to this day, and I hope the coming generations as well. Finally, I would like to quote my brother Hindpal. He's my older brother. Papaji walked the talk, and in his entire life chose the path of dharma or righteousness without wavering from his beliefs and ideals. And with that, I would like to thank everybody, and just to show you, my nephew here did this handwritten, hand-drawn drawing when you were only about 7 years?
No, I think about
10. And I thought this is just to make it a personal touch from the family member.